Guild Wars 2's Heal Alacrity Mechanist, one of the best healers in Guild Wars 2 at the moment, made only better in the June patch, not just because of the changes to the Heal Alacrity Mechanist himself, but to some of the nerfs on other healers, making Heal Mech probably one of the best choices there is. With 100% Alacrity uptime fairly easily, 25 stacks of might, permanent fury, regeneration, vigor, even protection, the Heal Alacrity Mechanist brings so much to the table. It has one or two shortfalls, but it's probably one of the best healers for new players to see. Let's have a look at why it's just so damn good. First, let's have a look at stats and armor. First of all, you want to try and get concentration to around 95% without food or utilities. This means that with food, I'll be just around 100%. This isn't really the most important thing in the world. You don't need to have cap boon duration, but it's always nice to have. So you've got a couple of options for armor. You can either go full Harriers, which will give you quite a lot of DPS surprisingly, as your mech also does quite a bit of DPS, and they do share your stats. Or, if you want to go for more tank variety, you could go for Givers. Givers is obviously a bit more of a tanky survivable setup, but Harriers will get you a bit of extra DPS. If you are going to use the build for Fractals, you can consider swapping out one or two pieces for Minstrels, as you'll get quite a lot of boon duration from your potions themselves. But just keep an eye on this and play around with it as you need. You can use any combination you want, and you can even use a couple of Magi pieces if you really do want to, and especially if you're not going to take a Parasigil. But, that being said, for runes, we want Rune of the Monk. It's the same with all boon healers. You always want Rune of the Monk, found from the Asolonian Catacombs, or you can use your dungeon currencies to barter for them. So you can do any dungeon and then barter for them. For your weapons, you want Mace and Shield. Sigils, you want Transference as basically a non-negotiable for most healers. For your off sigil, however, you can take the Sigil of Concentration. However, if you do run more Harriers or Givers pieces and no Magi's or Minstrels, you can take the Parasigil. I do recommend the Parasigil as it's just better for CC. Doing extra CC just makes you a better player overall and just helps your group with more content. Stat wise, all you really want to do is make sure that you're at your 95% boon duration and get some decent healing power out of it. And let's have a look at the trait tree. There are some variations that you can consider in the trait tree, and I'll point them out afterwards. This is generally the same setup that you'll use for both Radiant, Strikes, and Fractals, which is quite nice. But do be aware of some of the alternatives you can select. First of all, let's look at inventions. In column 1, there's only one real choice, Ally Ward. Basically, every time we are using shield skills, we're given extra protection to allies, as well as allowing protection to be stronger on us. This allows us to tank better, and this is quite important to have, to keep protection uptime, as well as personal survival. In column 2, Soothing Detonation. Healing allies when using tool belt skills. This is just a good way of getting some decent passive healing. An honorable mention does go to Experimental Turrets. What this allows you to do is when taking this trait, extra turrets will provide extra boons. So if you do take one or two turrets as your utility skills, depending on certain fight mechanics, you can try and cover some boons that otherwise might be lacking. And if not, you can just use it for Reflect of projectiles, which is pretty decent as well. And in column 3, Medical Dispersion Field. Basically storing healing while in combat and every 3 seconds spraying it out to heal allies around you. Also just a really good way of trying to keep your allies alive. The minor traits are also interesting. Cleansing Conditions when using a healing skill with a 10-second cooldown. Granting protection while using a heal skill, as well as getting some extra healing power. These are very, very good minor traits to have. Next up, let's look at Alchemy. In column 1, only one way to go, Health Insurance. Getting some extra increased healing as well as incoming healing when using your medkit. In column 2, Backpack Regenerator. Basically just some extra personal survival. Getting some passive healing while using your engineering kit. A little honorable mention is Comeback Cure. Every time you remove a condition, you grant regeneration to allies. This can be useful in certain fights where cleansing conditions and boon strip might coincide with each other. Some fractals as well as some raid fights like even Slothazar, where perhaps you're getting your boons corrupted. While cleansing, you're basically getting regeneration that might have been stripped by another source, even maybe Soulless Horror. Fights like these, this is definitely a good way to go. And in column 3, HGH, increasing the duration of elixirs and also allowing them to give 2 stacks of might. This can help you quite a bit with your might stacking and your might generation. For honorable mentions, Purity of Purpose. This is a very good fight with some of the fights that I already mentioned with Slothazar and Soulless Horror, where instead of cleansing a condition, it allows you to convert them to boons. This is a way of trying to unconvert converted boons that were conditions back into boons. And that's a mouthful of a sentence. But basically the idea is this, is that if you have certain condis on you, instead of it being cleansed, it will convert to boons. And this allows you to basically patch your boon uptime in certain fights where you might have had your boons stripped. Another good mention is Iron-Blooded. Iron-Blooded is more for personal survival. It reduces physical and condition damage for each boon you have. This allows you to be very, very tanky. You might maybe consider this in some raids, fractals, or even some landscape events where you don't want to die and make sure that you're pumping out as much healing as possible. The minor traits are also very good. Heal yourself for a slight amount every single time you give yourself a boon, as well as gaining concentration. Drinking Elixir C and also Elixir B when you either have 3 conditions affecting you or if you've dropped below 75% health. They do have cooldowns though, but they are still very, very decent minor traits to have. Now, I already have a video out on the Power Alac Mech, which I highly recommend you look at if you're interested. But in that video, it was before the patch. Mechanical Genius has been changed, and it is a buff the way they've changed it. You do not have to be within the 360 radius of your mech anymore to allow it to inherit your stats. It keeps 50% inherited stats at all time, and this allows you to step away to do mechanics in raids and fractals, and even in strike missions on the lot, which is a huge buff and a huge boost to the Alac Mech in all ways. The only difference now is that if you're outside of this raid when casting an ability, the cooldown is increased by 50%. But because of your high boon duration as an Alac healer, you do not need to cast these abilities to keep up Alacrity. Instead, you're using these abilities for either barrier and might, or for Aegis and stability and protection. This allows you to be able to time your uses much better than if you're playing a Power Alac. And that's why this is a huge boost to Heal Alacrity Mechanist. In column 1, Mech Arms High Impact Drivers, as aka the Explosive Knuckle. What this allows you to do is passively, while your mech auto attacks, it would generate might to surrounding allies. This is probably one of the easiest ways to keeping up might for your group, is just by letting your mech auto attack. The active ability, your F1 Explosive Knuckles, provides some weakness, which is soft CC, as well as just a bit of high damage. The second minor trait, Rocket Punch. When you use your skill 3, it basically uses Rocket Punch, which does damage, burning, as well as a 1-second Defiance Breakbar of 100. It's also an AoE, making this a very decent skill to have. Don't forget that your skill 3 will use this, so save your skill 3 for CC bars. Mech Frame Channeling Conduits, aka the Crisis Zone. What this allows you to do is when you or your mech apply barrier, you also provide Alacrity. As well, your mech gains better percentage of your own concentration and healing stats. This allows your mech to get more Alacrity, therefore its skills, the F1, 2, and 3, come off cooldown quicker. The F2 skill for yourself, the Crisis Zone, provides Aegis and stability, which are sorely lacking on an Alacrity Mechanist. And that's the only downside to playing it, is that this is your only source of Aegis and stability that you provide. As well, it provides protection and Alacrity, removes conditions, and is also a stun break. This protection is also very much needed to be able to cap protection for your party. And the final one, column 3, Mech Core Barrier Engines, aka the Barrier Burst. What this does is it allows your mech to pulse barrier automatically at each interval. And because of the choice we took in column 2, every time we apply barrier, we get Alacrity. So this is just a way of your mech basically pulsing Alacrity in combat. Also, your F3 skill is a huge skill. It basically channels the mech, applying barrier per pulse, 5 pulses, as well as Might and Fury. This is a good way of ramping up Might, Fury, and Alacrity at either the start of the fight or when you're pre-booning in Fractals. As for the barrier generation, every 3 seconds you'll proc 2 seconds of Alacrity, which means just by auto-attacking, your mech can keep up 67% uptime of Alacrity. This can get even better obviously with some skills and with your own personal skills that we will get into. As well, just the auto attacks from the high impact drivers will account for almost 16 to 18 stacks of might just from the mech auto attacking, and the rest is going to be made up by your own skills. Let's have a look at the weapons. As for your mace, Mace Strike, Mace Smash, and Mace Blast. Some big DPS skill with lots of confusion. Confusion's been reworked, so it's a lot more straight lined with smaller pulses on skill use, although there are some pulses that will make this do a little bit more damage on certain fights, like the Soulless Horror, the Massad's Overseer, and also Twin Lagos. Skill 2, Energizing Slam, providing some big DPS, some barrier, as well as vulnerability, confusion, vigor, and regen. Just notice that this skill will leap you forward, so try to make sure that you're in position to use this correctly and don't go into a mechanic that could kill you. Skill 3, Rocket Fist Prototype. This, if you don't recognize it, is actually also similar to the Rocket Punch minor trait. It's basically a small bit of damage, a burning stack, as well as 100 Defiance Breakbar. So when you use yours, your mech will use the exact same skill and you'll both do 100 Breakbar. This means that this skill will actually do 200 Defiance Breakbar damage if used correctly. And now onto the shield. Magnetic Shield. Create a magnetic field that reflects projectiles and when released will knock foes back. What this means is that for 3 seconds you have a projectile reflect as well as protection on use. You need to use it a second time to get the damage and the knockback, as well as a blast finisher with 150 Defiance Breakbar. Do not forget to use this skill a second time to blast a field. You want to make sure that there's something like a water field, a light field, or a fire field down when blasting the skill to try either get some might, some healing, or some cleansing going. Skill 5, Static Shield. Electrifying your shield so anyone that attacks you during the duration of this channel block will get CC for 100 Defiance Breakbar. Also on use you will get the protection, but don't forget to use it a second time to throw the shield. This creates an extra Defiance Breakbar as well as damage. Make sure that you use it afterwards to CC a target, because some targets won't hit you while you're channeling this effect. Like if you think of bosses like Gorseville or Samrock, you will have to release a skill to actually get the CC on them. For food and utilities, there's only very few options. For food, you either want to go for the bowl of spiced fruit salad, which basically is minus 10% incoming damage, healing power, and concentration. Or you want to go for the fruit salad with mint garnish. It's the exact same stats, but instead of minus incoming damage, it's plus 10% outgoing healing, which makes it a stronger healing option. And for utilities, there's only one option: Bountiful Maintenance Oils. To get the percentage healing power from healing power as well as concentration, just makes this the strongest healing output of any utility there is. Let's have a look at the basic utilities and then options thereof. For the healing skill, Medkit is probably just the simplest best way to go. When using it, you get access to 5 completely new skills. Med Blaster, probably just one of the easiest and strongest heals you've got. Base healing as well as healing for each boon. This allows it to scale up as well as being able to reach 5 targets on 3 pulses. It's an incredibly strong heal to use. Heal 2, Bandage Blast. This sends out 5 bandages with strong healing as well as regen. Remember, keeping up regen as a healer is probably one of the most important things you can do. Cleansing Field, one of the most important skills you've got. It's a condition removal which pulses as well as it's a comboed water field. Remember that, because water fields equate to more healing when blasted. Skill 4, Vital Burst, a massive AoE heal. This is probably one of your best ways to bring up people that have taken quite a lot of damage in a single pulse. And then skill 5, Infusion Bomb. This is your source of vigor, swiftness, and regen. Remember, regen is vitally important in a lot of fights, as well as a blast field. This means that if you do want to get some big burst healing, throwing down skill 3 and then 5 on top of it will blast it for some extra healing, and then skill 4 for some big AoE heals. Another utility that's fairly good and sometimes non-negotiable, the Elixir Gun. You might not use all of these skills, but there are a few that are super important. Now, if you're absolutely struggling for CC, Tranquilizer Dart does have weakness, which is a very, very soft CC. Glob Shot, not the worst thing in the world, mostly for the cripple. Because druids are almost obsolete at the moment, you might be in charge as the healer on dealing with certain mobs to either stop them completely or slow them down from reaching objectives. Not just that, there is a slight bit of swiftness attached to the skill. A very, very useful skill is the Fumigate. This is basically a conal spray with poison and also vulnerability. But more important than that, it removes conditions. Up to 5 conditions removed. This is an incredible Condi Cleanse skill. And also remember, as a Heal Alac Mech, you don't have a lot of sources of vulnerability. So to help maybe kind of cap off vulnerability for your Fractal group or your raid group, you might have to dip into this every now and then to use this skill to try and get some more vulnerability stacks. Acid Bomb, an incredibly good elixir skill. Remember, we get in the might from the traits we've chosen, as well as increased duration of the skill. But notice this is also a blast finisher which will leap you backwards. This can be used in a lot of fights like Kadim the Peerless to do some pylon kiting, but notice that it is a blast finisher. So before we use that skill, we might want to use skill 5, the Super Elixir. This is an incredibly big heal as well as pulse healing afterwards. So we throw it down, get some impact heal as well as pulse heal, some might, Condi Cleanse, as well as a light field, which can be blasted then with skill 4 for some extra Condi Cleanse. So if you throw down the skill and then blast it, you get in some decent Condi Cleanse. But remember, skill 4 will shoot you backwards. Another massive utility skill, Barrier Signet. Basically allowing you to take less damage from strike and conditions while left passive. But once activated, will basically create a projectile destruction dome on the mech. Everybody that's inside this dome will get barrier, as well as, because of our traits chosen, this barrier will give us Alacrity. This is a huge skill to use to try and get some extra barrier, Alacrity, as well as if left, you're tanking. This skill will just allow you to survive a little bit better. Now for a third and final utility, this is our optional utility. Generally, you'll leave it on Swift Signet. What this does is it's a stun break, removes 2 conditions, as well as allows you to teleport yourself and your mech to any location. So this is usually used to help reposition yourself in the mech in certain fights, allows you to stack up a bit better, but if left on passive, it also copies all your boons to your mech. This is a good way to make sure that your mech has got quickness and alacrity so that its skills come off cooldown quicker. It's a very, very decent skill to have. But if you do need other utilities, you can switch this utility out for some good options. Let's have a look at those options now. Another good option, Personal Battering Ram. On a 5-second charge cooldown, 232 Defiance break bar with 2 charges is a very, very decent break bar skill to have. It's also got a 20-second recount. So what this means is that when I use one of these skills, I'll have to wait 20 seconds before it gets another charge again. Although I have to wait 5 seconds before I can use the skill again because it has 2 charges. It's also a little bit of DPS as well as a decent launch that can be used in some fights to help push NPC or enemy to do mechanics in certain raid and strike and landscape fights. A couple of nice turrets to have if taking experimental turrets is turrets like the Thumb turret, which has high defiance break bar as well as protection. You could struggle to hold up your protection uptime if you do not use your skills correctly, so this could be an option to look at. If not, the Electrified Net turret is also a decent option, as it gives break bar damage, immobilization, as well as a little bit of swiftness. The other turrets are interesting, but I don't think as necessary. As always, the toolkit is also interesting as it's got a fairly decent single target pull with a big range, as well as a channeled block. This can be useful if you end up hand kiting on Deimos, or if you just need some way of dealing with certain mechanics. Personal favorite of mine, Throw Mine. It's a fairly decent Defiance break bar, but as well, it's also a boon stripper, removing 3 boons with some big damage as well. I usually keep this on active when I'm doing Fractals, especially if I'm playing Power Alac Mech, but as the Heal Alac Mech, it might be your job to boon strip, so just keep an eye out on this skill in particular. And for elite utilities, there's probably 2 options. Most often, you'll take the Elite Mortar Kit. What this allows you to do is get access to a couple of skills. Most of these you won't look at too much, but notice that skill 3 is a good chill. This can be used to slow down certain targets when doing certain fights so that they can't reach objectives. It will stay on the floor for a fairly long time, 5 seconds, and will chill them as they move through. This can give you some time to deal with certain mobs before they reach objectives to help do mechanics. As well, Flash Shell. Not a bad way of getting some sources of blindness. This can be used in a lot of fights, but I'm not going to go too much into that, and notice that it's also a light field. But the most important skill is skill 5. The Elixir Shell allows you to get the 2 might because of our trait that we've taken. We've also increased its duration, and as well, this skill will last 6 seconds on the floor, doing decent passive healing as well as a water field. A lot of times you want to cast this when you know there's going to be a lot of damage incoming, as the general pulsing of healing will just help you heal while you switch to mid-kit and pump out some other heals. Another good elite utility to take is Overclock Signet, reducing the cooldown of your other signets. So in this case, Barrier Burst would have been at 30 seconds, now it's at 24, giving us 6 seconds off. As well, the skill allows you, when used, to revive your mech instantly. So if Recall Mech is on cooldown and you cannot revive your mech, i.e. it has died in the fight, by using this signet, it will return it to life instantly at full health and will use the Jade Buster Cannon. Even though we don't care much about the DPS and the burn-in stacks, it's a nice way of having your mech revived, because without your mech you cannot generate decent alacrity. So let's take a couple of seconds to talk about your mentality going into a fight. First of all, you want to make sure that you're using skill 2 off of cooldown. Using skill 4 and 5 off of cooldown if you do not think there's going to be a Defiance break bar, or if you need projectile destruction in the last while. Before a fight, you want to maybe look at using F2 and F3, not for raids obviously, but for fractals when you're pre-booning or in landscape. So try and make sure that you've got not just a decent amount of alacrity, but also might and protection uptime. You want to make sure that during the fights that you're using from your Medcat infused bomb to try keep your vigor and regen up. But remember, using a cleansing field as well beforehand if you need blast healing. Going into Elixir Gun and using obviously skill 5 and 4 to get some extra might would be fairly good, but remember not to blast yourself away with the acid bomb. Going into the Elite Mortar for a bit of extra might and passive healing. When big damage is coming, remember to use your barrier signet ahead of time, or to use your F3 skill to try get some extra barrier before a hit is coming. Make sure that you've got as much incoming protection as possible. Your F2 for some Aegis, stability and protection can be good. Also, another thing to remember before big damage, go into your mortar kit, use your elixir shell, go into your elixir gun, use your super elixir. Allowing these passive heals to lie there on the floor and pulse will make healing for you a lot easier. Then go into your med kit and make sure you're ready with your 3, 5 and 4 skills. These skills are very big, especially if you blast the warfield. Then don't forget to just spam as much auto attack as possible and also use your bandage blast. These heals are very big. Remember, in terms of Radiant and Fractals, keeping up protection and regen will make your life a lot easier. When it comes to CC, let's think about a few things. First of all, our big CC skills. Using skill 3 for your CC as well as your mech CC. This can be very good to try and make sure that you've got that instant 200 break bar. Using your skill 4 and 5 for the CC, but do not forget to push it a second time to actually cash out for the extra CC. If you don't, you're losing 250 break bar damage. Try and channel your static shield if their target is attacking you to try and get a few of those extra CC bits from the channel duration. Second of all, if CC is still lacking, look at personal battering ram. This is a massive skill, and with 2 charges can make a big difference, especially in fights like Samrock and Gorseval. Do note that when you are underwater, you do not have access to your mech. Therefore, you will not be able to give a substantial amount of alacrity when underwater. This means that you might need to switch away, especially if you're doing something like the aquatic rune fractal. I would also recommend having a look at Scrapper as another elite specialization. Having access to super speed as well as the sneak gyro is a preferred way of doing skips and content in between bosses in Fractals and in Radiant. Being able to sneak past mobs and not have to fight them generally will make your runs a lot quicker and smoother, and your team will definitely appreciate you. For more on this build and others just like it, catch me streaming on Twitch. Stop by anytime and hang out. If you found this helpful, please subscribe and share with some friends. It will really help grow the channel.